Welcome to Toxic from Reddit, where real toxic relationship stories come to life. Here you'll hear true stories from people who experience toxic relationships from different perspectives. Partners dealing with cheating, manipulation, gaslighting, red flags, and all the emotional chaos that comes with loving someone who hurts you. Stories of betrayal, of finding strength to leave, of discovering the truth, of heartbreak, of healing, and the raw reality of toxic love. This is a real story, shared anonymously on Reddit. Some details have been changed to protect the identity of the people involved. Hi everyone, my name is Caroline. I'm 29 years old and I live in Charleston, South Carolina. And I need to tell you about the most devastating and calculated betrayal that has completely destroyed my marriage and has shattered my ability to trust anyone, which is that 4 weeks ago, my best friend secretly recorded a conversation with my husband where he confessed that he only married me because he knew I was going to inherit millions of dollars from my grandmother, that he never actually loved me, that he's been having an affair with his coworker for over a year, that he was planning to wait until my inheritance came through and then divorce me and take half of everything, and that he's been manipulating me and playing a role for the entire 3 years we've been married. And now I'm dealing with the soul-crushing reality that the man I loved and trusted saw me as nothing more than a paycheck and has been using me this entire time. I'm going to tell you this entire story from the beginning because the level of manipulation and deception is so calculated and so cruel that you need to understand how I was targeted, how I was used, and how my husband orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal my family's money. My husband's name is Brandon. He's 32 years old, and we met 4 years ago at a charity gala in Charleston that my family was hosting. My best friend's name is Melissa. She's 30 years old, and we've been best friends since we were in elementary school, and she's the one who uncovered the truth about Brandon and saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I come from a wealthy family in Charleston. My father owns a successful real estate development company, and my grandmother on my mother's side is extremely wealthy. She made her fortune in the shipping industry decades ago. My grandmother has always been very close to me. I'm her only granddaughter, and she's made it clear throughout my life that she intends to leave the majority of her estate to me when she passes away. My grandmother is now 87 years old, and while she's still in relatively good health, everyone in my family knows that I'm going to inherit a substantial amount of money eventually. We're talking about an estate worth approximately $15 million. I've never been comfortable with the fact that my family has money, and I've always tried to live a relatively normal life and to not flaunt my family's wealth. I went to college, I got a degree in art history, and I work as a curator at a small art gallery in Charleston, which is a job I love even though it doesn't pay very much. I've always been careful about dating because I've had experiences in the past where men were more interested in my family's money than they were in me as a person. So when I met Brandon at the charity gala 4 years ago, I was immediately cautious about his intentions. Brandon was working as a financial advisor at an investment firm in Charleston, and he had been invited to the gala by one of his clients. Brandon and I were introduced by a mutual acquaintance, and we started talking, and I found Brandon to be charming, intelligent, and surprisingly down-to-earth. Brandon didn't seem impressed by the wealth and the luxury at the gala, and he actually made jokes about how uncomfortable he felt at fancy events like this because he came from a working-class background. Brandon told me that he had grown up in a small town in Georgia, that his parents were both teachers, and that he had worked his way through college and had built his career through hard work and determination. I found Brandon's humility refreshing, and I appreciated that he didn't seem to be trying to impress me with money or status. We exchanged numbers at the gala, and Brandon asked me out to dinner the following week. On our first date, Brandon took me to a casual restaurant, nothing fancy or expensive, and we had a great conversation about our lives, our interests, and our values. Brandon seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person, and he asked me questions about my work at the gallery, about my hobbies, and about my family. When the topic of my family came up, I was intentionally vague about the extent of my family's wealth because I wanted to see if Brandon was interested in me for who I was, rather than for my money. Brandon didn't press me for details about my family's finances, which I took as a good sign. Brandon and I continued dating, and over the next several months, our relationship grew stronger. Brandon was attentive, romantic, and supportive, and he seemed to genuinely care about me and my happiness. Brandon would surprise me with thoughtful gestures, like bringing me my favorite coffee in the morning, or planning creative dates like picnics in the park or visits to local art exhibits. I started to fall in love with Brandon, and I felt like I had finally found someone who loved me for who I was, rather than for my family's money. About 6 months into our relationship, I introduced Brandon to my family, including my grandmother. My grandmother can be very protective of me, and she's always been skeptical of the men I've dated because she worries that they're only interested in my inheritance. When my grandmother met Brandon, she seemed to like him, and she told me later that she thought Brandon seemed genuine and that she approved of our relationship. Looking back now, I realized that Brandon must have been very calculated in how he presented himself to my grandmother, because he knew that winning her approval was essential to his plan. About a year into our relationship, Brandon proposed to me during a weekend trip to Savannah, Georgia. Brandon had planned a romantic evening, and he proposed to me on the riverfront at sunset. And of course I said yes because I was in love with him, and I believed that he loved me too. We started planning our wedding, and throughout the planning process, Brandon was involved and enthusiastic, and he seemed excited about starting our life together. We got married about 3 years ago in a beautiful ceremony at a historic plantation venue outside of Charleston. My family paid for the wedding, which was a large and expensive affair with over 200 guests. Brandon's family came from Georgia for the wedding, and they seemed like nice, normal, working-class people, which reinforced my belief that Brandon came from humble beginnings and wasn't interested in me for my money. After we got married, Brandon and I moved into a house that my father had given us as a wedding gift. It was a beautiful historic home in downtown Charleston. I thought it was incredibly generous of my father, and Brandon seemed grateful. Although looking back now, I realized that Brandon probably saw this as confirmation that he had made the right choice in marrying me. For the first year of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. Like Brandon and I were happy, we were building our life together, and I felt like I had found my soulmate. But then I started noticing small changes in Brandon's behavior that made me feel uneasy. Brandon started working longer hours, and he would often come home late at night saying that he had been meeting with clients or working on important projects. Brandon also became more interested in my family's finances. Like he would ask me questions about my grandmother's estate, about how much money she had, about what her plans were for distributing her wealth, and about when I expected to receive my inheritance. I found these questions uncomfortable, and I would try to change the subject or would give vague answers because I didn't want our marriage to be about money. Brandon would also make comments about how we should be saving more money and investing more aggressively, and he would suggest that I should ask my father for financial advice or for help with investments. I started to feel like Brandon was becoming more focused on money and less focused on our relationship. But whenever I would bring this up, Brandon would say that he was just trying to be responsible and to plan for our future. About a year and a half into our marriage, my grandmother's health started to decline, and she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The doctor said that my grandmother probably had a few years left, but that her condition would gradually worsen. My family started having conversations about my grandmother's estate planning, and my grandmother confirmed that she was leaving the majority of her estate to me, with smaller amounts going to other family members. This information was shared with Brandon because he was my husband, and I noticed that after Brandon learned the specific amount of money I would be inheriting, his behavior changed even more. Brandon became more attentive and more affectionate, like he was suddenly interested in our relationship again, and he would talk about all of the things we could do with the inheritance money, like traveling the world, buying a vacation home, starting a business, and investing in real estate. I felt uncomfortable with how focused Brandon was on the inheritance, and I told him that I didn't want to think about my grandmother's money because it felt wrong to be planning how to spend money that would only come to me after my grandmother died. Brandon apologized and said that he understood, but I could tell that he was still thinking about it. Around this same time, my best friend Melissa started expressing concerns about Brandon. Melissa had never particularly liked Brandon, although she had never said anything negative about him before. But about 2 years into my marriage, Melissa started making comments about how Brandon seemed fake, or how she didn't trust him, or how she thought he was hiding something. I was defensive of Brandon, and I told Melissa that she was being unfair and that she didn't know him the way I did. Melissa backed off, but she told me that she was just looking out for me and that she wanted me to be careful. I appreciated Melissa's concern, but I thought she was being overprotective and maybe even a little jealous of my relationship. About 6 months ago, Melissa called me and said that she needed to talk to me about something important. We met for coffee, and Melissa told me that she had seen Brandon having lunch with a woman at a restaurant downtown, and that they had seemed very close and very intimate. Melissa said that she had watched them for a while, and that Brandon and this woman were holding hands across the table, and that at one point Brandon had leaned over and kissed the woman. I was shocked and devastated, and I immediately confronted Brandon about it. Brandon denied everything, and he said that Melissa must have been mistaken, or that she had seen him with a client and had misinterpreted the situation. Brandon said that he would never cheat on me, and that Melissa was trying to cause problems in our marriage because she was jealous. I wanted to believe Brandon, and I told Melissa that she must have been mistaken. Melissa was frustrated, and she said that she knew what she had seen and that she was worried about me. Over the next few months, Melissa continued to express concerns about Brandon, and she would tell me that she had seen him in places where he said he wasn't, or that she had heard rumors about him from other people. I started to feel torn between my loyalty to my husband and my trust in my best friend. I started paying more attention to Brandon's behavior, and I started noticing more red flags. Like Brandon was constantly on his phone texting someone, and he would hide his phone screen when I walked into the room. Brandon was also spending more and more time away from home, and his explanations for where he was and what he was doing were becoming increasingly vague and inconsistent. I started to suspect that maybe Melissa was right, and that maybe Brandon was hiding something from me. About 2 months ago, Melissa came to me with a plan, and she said that she wanted to try to get Brandon to confess to whatever he was hiding. Melissa said that she had been doing some research, and that she had found out that the woman Brandon had been seen with was named Jessica, and that Jessica worked at the same investment firm as Brandon. Melissa said that she was going to try to befriend Brandon and to get him to open up to her about what was really going on. I was hesitant about Melissa's plan, because it felt like we were setting a trap for Brandon. But Melissa convinced me that it was the only way to find out the truth. Melissa reached out to Brandon and asked if they could meet for coffee, and she said that she wanted to apologize for causing tension in our marriage, and that she wanted to try to build a better relationship with him. Brandon agreed to meet with Melissa, probably because he thought it would help smooth things over and would get Melissa to stop being suspicious of him. Melissa met with Brandon at a coffee shop, and she secretly recorded their entire conversation on her phone. Melissa started the conversation by apologizing to Brandon for being suspicious of him, and she said that she realized she had been unfair and that she wanted to support our marriage. Brandon seemed relieved, and he thanked Melissa for reaching out. Then Melissa started asking Brandon questions about our marriage, and about how he was feeling, and about whether he was happy. Brandon started opening up, and he said that marriage was harder than he had expected, and that sometimes he felt trapped. Melissa sympathized with Brandon, and she said that she understood that marriage could be challenging. Then Melissa asked Brandon about Jessica, and she said that she had heard rumors that Brandon was seeing someone at work. Brandon initially denied it, but Melissa pressed him, and she said that she wasn't going to judge him, and that she just wanted to understand what was going on. Brandon eventually admitted that he had been having an affair with Jessica for over a year, and that he was in love with her. Melissa asked Brandon why he didn't just leave me if he was in love with someone else. And this is where Brandon said something that changed everything. Brandon said, and I'm quoting directly from the recording that Melissa made, "I can't leave Caroline yet. I need to wait until her grandmother dies, and until Caroline gets her inheritance. I've invested 3 years into this marriage, and I'm not going to walk away empty-handed. Once the money comes through, I'll divorce Caroline and I'll take half of everything. And then Jessica and I can finally be together." Melissa was shocked, but she kept her composure, and she asked Brandon more questions. Melissa said, "So you only married Caroline for her money?" Brandon said, "Of course, why else would I marry her? She's boring. She's not that attractive, and she's obsessed with her stupid art gallery job, but she's going to inherit $15 million. So I put up with her. I've been playing the role of the devoted husband for 3 years. And it's been exhausting, but it'll all be worth it when I get my payout." Melissa asked Brandon if he had ever loved me, and Brandon laughed and said, "No, I never loved her. I researched her family before I even approached her at that charity gala. I knew exactly who she was and how much money she was going to inherit. I planned the whole thing. I knew I needed to seem humble and down to earth so that she wouldn't suspect that I was after her money, and it worked perfectly." Melissa asked Brandon what he was going to do if my grandmother lived for many more years. And Brandon said, "I've thought about that. If it takes too long, I might just divorce Caroline anyway and try to get as much as I can in the settlement. But ideally, I'll wait until the inheritance comes through because that's when the real money will be available." Melissa ended the conversation shortly after that, and she immediately came to my house to play me the recording. I listened to the entire conversation, and I felt like my entire world was collapsing around me. I couldn't believe that the man I had loved and trusted for 4 years had never actually loved me, and that he had been using me and manipulating me this entire time. I couldn't believe that Brandon had researched my family and had targeted me specifically because of my inheritance. I couldn't believe that Brandon had been planning to divorce me and to take half of my inheritance money. And I couldn't believe that Brandon thought I was boring and unattractive, and that he had been putting up with me just to get access to my money. I cried for hours, and Melissa stayed with me and comforted me. After I had processed the initial shock, I started to get angry, and I realized that I needed to take action to protect myself and my family's money. I called my father and I played him the recording, and my father was furious. My father immediately called our family attorney, and we had an emergency meeting to discuss what to do. The attorney told me that because I live in South Carolina, which is not a community property state, I would have some protection of my inheritance as long as I kept it separate from marital assets. The attorney said that if I inherited money after divorcing Brandon, he would have no claim to it. But the attorney also said that if I inherited money while still married to Brandon, and if I commingled that money with marital assets, Brandon could potentially claim that he was entitled to a portion of it in a divorce. The attorney advised me to file for divorce immediately, and to make sure that the divorce was finalized before my grandmother passed away. The attorney also said that I should consider getting a restraining order against Brandon if I felt unsafe, and that I should document everything in case Brandon tried to contest the divorce or tried to claim that he was entitled to more money. I followed the attorney's advice and I filed for divorce the next day. I also changed the locks on our house, and I had Brandon's belongings packed up and moved to a storage unit. When Brandon came home from work that day and found that he couldn't get into the house, he called me repeatedly, and he sent me dozens of text messages asking what was going on. I finally answered the phone, and I told Brandon that I knew everything, that Melissa had recorded his confession, and that I was divorcing him. Brandon tried to deny it at first, but when I told him that I had a recording of him admitting everything, he changed his strategy. Brandon started begging me for forgiveness, and he said that he had been lying to Melissa, and that he did actually love me, and that he had just been venting and saying things he didn't mean. I said, "Brandon, I heard the recording. You said that you researched my family before you even met me. You said that you planned the whole thing. You said that you never loved me. Those aren't things you say when you're just venting." Brandon realized that he couldn't talk his way out of it, and he started getting angry. And he said, "Fine. You want to know the truth? Yes. I married you for your money, and you know what? You should be grateful that someone like me was willing to put up with you for 3 years. You're boring, you're plain, and you have no personality. The only interesting thing about you is your family's money." I hung up on Brandon, and I blocked his number. Over the next few weeks, Brandon tried to contact me through email and through social media, and he alternated between begging me to take him back and threatening me with legal action. Brandon's attorney sent my attorney a letter demanding a large settlement in the divorce, claiming that Brandon was entitled to compensation for the 3 years he had invested in our marriage. My attorney responded by providing evidence of Brandon's affair and by providing the recording of Brandon's confession to Melissa, and we made it clear that we would fight any attempt by Brandon to get money from me. Brandon's attorney backed down after that, and we were able to negotiate a divorce settlement where Brandon got nothing except his personal belongings and his own retirement accounts. The divorce was finalized about 2 weeks ago, and I'm now officially free from Brandon. I also found out through mutual acquaintances that Brandon's affair with Jessica ended shortly after I filed for divorce. Apparently, Jessica had not known that Brandon was only with me for my money, and when she found out about his scheme, she was disgusted, and she broke up with him. I also found out that Brandon lost his job at the investment firm. Apparently, his employer found out about his affair with Jessica, and about his scheme to marry me for money, and they decided that his behavior was unethical and reflected poorly on the company. So Brandon is now divorced, unemployed, and alone, and I have to say that I don't feel sorry for him at all. I've been going to therapy to help me process the betrayal and to help me understand how I was manipulated. My therapist has explained to me that people like Brandon are often narcissists, who see other people as objects to be used for their own benefit, rather than as human beings with feelings and value. My therapist has helped me understand that Brandon's behavior was not a reflection of my worth as a person, and that I did nothing wrong. My therapist has also been helping me work through my feelings of shame and embarrassment, because I feel stupid for not seeing the signs earlier and for believing Brandon's lies. But my therapist has reassured me that Brandon was very skilled at manipulation, and that he had planned his deception carefully, and that it's not my fault that I trusted him. I've been thinking a lot about the red flags that I missed or ignored, like how Brandon had asked me detailed questions about my grandmother's estate, like how Brandon had become more attentive after he learned the exact amount of my inheritance, like how Brandon had been spending more time away from home and had been secretive about his phone, and like how Melissa had tried to warn me multiple times that something was wrong. I've realized that I ignored these red flags because I was in love with Brandon, and because I wanted to believe that he loved me for who I was rather than for my money. I've learned that it's important to pay attention to red flags, and that it's important to listen to the people who care about you when they express concerns about your relationship. I've been incredibly grateful for Melissa, because she literally saved me from making a terrible mistake. If Melissa hadn't recorded that conversation with Brandon, I might never have known the truth, and I might have stayed married to Brandon until my grandmother passed away, and then Brandon would have divorced me and taken half of my inheritance. Melissa risked our friendship by being persistent in her suspicions about Brandon, and she went out of her way to uncover the truth, and I will be forever grateful to her for that. I've told Melissa that she's not just my best friend, she's my hero, and I don't know what I would have done without her. I've been thinking about my grandmother, and about how grateful I am that she's still alive and that I was able to finalize my divorce before she passes away. My grandmother knows about everything that happened with Brandon, and she told me that she's proud of me for being strong and for protecting myself and our family. My grandmother also told me that she had always had a bad feeling about Brandon, but that she hadn't wanted to say anything because she didn't want to interfere in my marriage. I wish my grandmother had told me about her concerns, but I understand why she didn't. I've been thinking about Brandon's family and about whether they knew about his scheme. I've wondered if Brandon's parents knew that he was targeting me for my money, or if they genuinely believed that Brandon loved me. I'll probably never know the answer to that question, but I hope that they didn't know, because I would hate to think that an entire family conspired to deceive me. I've been thinking about Jessica, the woman Brandon was having an affair with, and I actually feel a little bit sorry for her because she was also being manipulated by Brandon. Jessica thought she was in a relationship with someone who loved her, but in reality, Brandon was just using her as a distraction while he waited to get his hands on my inheritance money. I've been thinking about dating again eventually, but I'm not ready yet, because I need to heal from this betrayal, and I need to rebuild my ability to trust. When I do start dating again, I know that I'm going to be much more careful about protecting myself and about vetting potential partners. I'm going to be more open about my family's wealth from the beginning, because I want to weed out people who are only interested in me for my money. And I'm going to pay much closer attention to red flags, and I'm going to listen to my friends and family when they express concerns about someone I'm dating. I've been thinking about other people who might be in similar situations, who might be dating or married to someone who's only with them for their money, and I want to tell them to pay attention to the warning signs. I want to tell them to be suspicious if their partner asks a lot of questions about their finances or their inheritance, or if their partner becomes more attentive after learning about their wealth. I want to tell them to be suspicious if their partner is secretive about their phone or their activities, or if their partner is spending a lot of time away from home with vague explanations. I want to tell them to listen to their friends and family if they express concerns about their partner, because the people who love you can often see things that you can't see when you're in love. And I want to tell them that if they discover that their partner has been using them for money, they should take immediate action to protect themselves financially, and they should consult with an attorney to understand their rights and their options. I want to tell them that they should file for divorce immediately if they're married, and they should make sure to keep any inheritance or family money separate from marital assets. And I want to tell them that they shouldn't feel ashamed or embarrassed, because being targeted by a manipulative person who's after your money is not your fault, and it doesn't reflect on your worth as a person. Thank you for reading my story, and if you've been through something similar, if you've discovered that your partner was only with you for your money, if you've been saved by a friend who uncovered the truth about your relationship, if you've had to divorce someone who was trying to steal your inheritance, or if you've had to rebuild your ability to trust after being used and manipulated, I would love to hear how you dealt with it and where you are now. I'm still healing from this experience, still processing the betrayal, still working on rebuilding my sense of trust, and still figuring out what I want my future to look like. But I'm grateful that I found out the truth before it was too late, and I'm grateful for my best friend Melissa, who literally saved my life and my family's fortune.